Okay. Is this working? Naho? Speak. All right. Okay. We just a couple of reminders. Right in the way when I do that. All right. Before we get started, first, Happy New Year. I know it's not yet; it's later. But just as a reminder, along these lines, there is. Tonight, after services, there's going to be festivities here, food and whatever, so everybody's welcome. It started out as going to be kind of a young adult thing, and then we thought, well, let's be young adults and teens, and we're like, let's just say whoever wants to stay, stay. So that's tonight after services, and stay as long as you can, as long as you're able. I like to do the New York New Year's Eve, that way I'm done at 10, and just call it good. And then one of our focuses for 2024 is something we've actually been working on since about 2016 or so. For this young adult group, as you all know who have been involved with this for the last few years, we have a wide age range. We go from, the young adult, young families group is technically from right out of high school up until people with kids in elementary school, which is broader than most people think it should be. It's worked well. I've really been encouraged by how this group has mobilized, and things have started to happen on our own. But one of the things we do want to focus on in 2024 is our young adult group that is the single young adults and those who are married and don't have kids. So with that horrible graphic on the screen, the end of January, the 26th, Friday night, we're going to do a game night here for that group. No offense to you with kids. With the kind of way we're thinking about it, with those with kids, there's the kids care group and some of those other things that are for that age group. Well, this is for the other age group. Technically, they're called sinks and dinks, the single income, no kids, and double income, no kids. But apparently that sounds offensive. So we're just going to call them this. Singles and married without kids. I couldn't figure out what I said there. So that will be the end of this month. If you could just let us know the Friday before that. That way we can have food ready to go. So that's it as far as announcements go. Do we have any prayer requests? Blake, could I put you on the spot to lead a prayer? Yeah, the continued prayers for the Fulfers. Jerry's in, it looks like toward the end right now. And that's difficult for Addie, for sure. And the rest of the family. Oh, has he? Okay, so Jerry Fulfer has passed. So prayers for Addie and for the rest of the family. Yeah, that's one of those things. That's too bad for the rest of them. It's great for him. Beth Havlick, sick at home. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Ed Kloppenstein's stepfather passed away. Prayers for that family. We probably still have some travelers, some coming home, some going out and doing other things. Okay, Blake, if you don't mind. Okay, we're going to be in Matthew 27, John 19, and Luke 23, back and forth like we've been lately. I don't know why we leave Mark alone, but whatever. When we were here last week, as we ended, Jesus had been sent from Pilate to Herod. Pilate hears Jesus is a Galilean, and he says, aha, here's my out. I can send him to Herod and let Herod deal with him. Let him make a decision. Now Herod outranks Pilate. So Herod doesn't really have to do anything here. And that's, as it turns out, what he does. The text tells us that Herod really kind of he really had desired to meet Jesus. For what reason? Yeah, see him do something. He didn't care about his teaching, didn't care about any of that. He just wanted to see him do something. So Jesus comes before Herod, and let me just say this real quick. Indulge me, forgive me. We're going to blaze through this just because we kind of have to. But some of this is familiar and some of this is a recap, but we're going to hit a lot of things really quick.
I wanted to sidetrack you before you got blazing. You did a real good job last week talking about the dynamic between Herod and Pilate. The one thing I never quite been able to track on was why they became such good buddies after this happened. And it mentions that they got along after that, where they had been at loggerheads together.
Yeah, it almost seems like, in fact, Jake and I were talking about this last Sunday. It almost is that old cliche, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that Herod has been watching all of this happen, I'm sure, from wherever. I mean, like I said, his palace is in Tiberias. He's in Jerusalem for the feast like everybody else. But what he said, what he's going to see is this Jewish charlatan, in his opinion. And I guess since Pilate sends him to him, he gets this chance to see Jesus finally. So it almost seems like they make this connection. It's like, hey, you hate the Jews too? Yeah, me too. I mean, it's almost like that's kind of the... Jake, Jim, you want to add to that?
That's what I was going to say. I mean, Pilate's real famous for coming in and doing the shield with Caesar's image on it.
Mm-hmm.
That was like the one thing that the Jewish leaders can't complain to Caesar about, because what are they going to do? Say that your image has been troping around?
Yeah.
And then also here, Herod clothes him in purple, puts the robe on him, and then sends him back almost, kind of like a backhand to the Jewish leaders as well. This is your king.
Yeah.
And that's what it says in Luke. That after that they turn. So it just seemed to me that both of them really just had a distaste for the Jewish leadership, and they just kept trying to find sneaky ways to goad them in that biggest pond.
Yeah, it's kind of like when the two bullies at school decide they're going to be friends. If sometime in the last weeks you've watched Christmas Story, I think of whatever his name is. I can't even think of his name now. The bully and his little toady friend. That's kind of Herod and Pilate. The bullies become friends. That's the worst analogy ever. But as Jesus comes before Herod, Herod knows about Jesus. We kind of touched on this last week. Jesus has been all over in Herod's territory. But it does seem like we don't have any record of Jesus ever being in Tiberias. I mentioned last week Tiberias was a city that was relatively new city. It was built to honor Tiberius Caesar. And as they were doing the excavating to lay the foundation for the city, they uncovered a graveyard. So the Jews were like, we can never go to that city. That's off limits for us. So Herod has heard of Jesus, is what I'm saying. That's an assumption we can make. But as he stands there, Jesus doesn't do anything. Jesus doesn't perform anything for him. And Herod just gets bored, it seems like. And Herod just goes, you know what? Get him out. I don't want I have nothing to do with this. Send him back to Pilate. Now, at this point, the crowd has gotten to be rather hostile. And we've talked about this throughout this quarter. The crowd, not days ago, was very supportive of Jesus. But as the Jewish leaders you have to just, again, kind of assume, filtered through the crowd, spread their poison about Jesus, about this whole situation, the crowd has now turned against Jesus. Look at Luke 23. That's where we'll start. Luke 23, 13 through 16. Pilate called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You have brought this man as one who misleads the people, but in fact, after examining him in your presence, I have found no grounds to charge this man with those things you accuse him of." I think I mentioned that last week. Pilate reiterates, I can't even charge him. Now, you know, from our judicial system, you don't go from, hey, there's a bad guy, let's execute him. There's a trial, there's a charge, there's a process. Pilate's saying, I can't even get you guys to step one, much less the end result you're after. So he says, can't even charge him. Neither has Herod, because he sent him back to us. Clearly, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, here's what I'll do. I'll have him whipped and then release him. Then they all cried out together, "Take this man away, release Barabbas to us." Now, this is one of those things that even as a kid, this always fascinated me. This is a common custom. I'm sure you've probably heard this at some point or another. But this is a common thing to do, to say, it's the Jewish feast day, Rome, to throw the Jews a bone, will say, I'll release somebody. Now, think of what we're seeing in this part of the world right now. There's the Israeli forces, the Hamas forces, they're trading prisoners right now. Every now and then there is, we'll release some prisoners, we'll release some hostages. There's some more political dynamics there. But it's kind of what is happening here. What Pilate says is, we have the Romans, we've probably arrested some of your Jewish leaders, some of your Jewish people who are just kind of rabble-rousers, just some kind of miscreants. Who could we release? Thinking, it seems, that they would say, some thief, some common petty criminal, some guy who maybe got a group of people kind of agitated. They say release Barabbas. Now, we don't have a great deal of history. Text does tell us that he was a seditionist. He was a bad guy. Josephus, Philo give us a little bit more background, just, kind of anecdotally. The Barabbas was a bad guy. Barabbas was a terrorist. And it's always been interesting to me that this is the first guy they go to. It's not release Mrs. Jones' son that you guys have been holding, because he's not really a bad kid. He got caught up in. It's give us this guy. It's like give us Bin Laden. Give us the worst, but keep Jesus. That's the lengths they're willing to go to. Now, what does this do for Pilate? Where does this put Pilate? Yeah. Wait, release who? No, wait, he's a real bad guy. I mean, we know he's a bad guy. You want us to release him? Now, the thing is that Barabbas doing what he does, he causes problems for the Jews. Because if he's a guy who stirs up dissension, that just makes the Romans more upset at all the Jews. So the Jewish leaders have to be like, he's probably a good guy to have off the streets. But they immediately jump to release Barabbas. Now, again, extra biblical literature tells us that Barabbas becomes a believer. Now, I don't know that's true. History tells us that. But man, and you've probably heard this before. You probably heard this at a Lord's Supper talk or whatever. You talk about a guy that is just a concrete example of Jesus took his place. That is a guy who's going to die. That is a guy that both sides hate. And the crowd says, give us him, and Jesus allows that to work. You would think if there was a point where Jesus is going to say enough of this, it would be right, release this horrible guy who's going to go hurt other people, who's going to go cause problems. No, this is not how this is supposed to go. But they say release Barabbas. Now, back over to Matthew 27. Matthew 27, 16 and 17. Oh, here's some background of who this guy is. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they gathered together, Pilate said to them, who do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ? For he knew it was because of envy that they had handed him over. Pilate says, I'm going to put them in a spot where I'm going to say, okay, you want this horrible, horrible criminal or just this guy that you're mad at? Thinking, it seems, that they would go, oh, well, we can't do that. Well, no, that's the guy. That they've got to make the decision. So this is a bad political situation for everybody here. Verse 21, the governor asked them, which of the two do you want me to release for you? Barabbas, they answered. Pilate asked them, what should I do then with Jesus, who is called the Christ? So he's in a bad spot. I mean, this is, I wish we had time to really layer this. But if you just think about this, this is a bad spot for the Jewish leaders. This is a bad spot for Pilate. But this shows the complete animosity toward Jesus. This shows how much this decision has been made. The Jewish leader, the night before, hours earlier at Annas and Caiaphas, they made their decision. We're getting this guy killed. They're at the point now, we're like, whatever we have to do this, let's get this done. John records 5 times that Pilate says, let me release him. There's no sense in this. This doesn't make any sense. Then this moment. Sorry, I'm trying to skip through here. John 19. Go to John's account here. John 19, verse 8, when Pilate heard this statement, Jesus says, or the Jews have said that he ought to be killed because he makes himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He went back into his headquarters and asked, Jesus, where are you from? But Jesus did not give him an answer. So Pilate said to him, now, again, think of this, the anxiety, the tension here. Pilate says, do you refuse to speak to me? Because you don't do that. You don't refuse. I mean, if you're innocent, and usually, I mean, we know how this works. Usually even the guilty guy, it's the old adage, there's everybody in prison is innocent, and that's what they all say. He's like, are you gonna refuse to talk to me about this? But Jesus did not give him an answer. Do you not know, verse 10, don't you know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you? And Jesus' response in verse 11, you would have no authority over me at all if it hadn't been given to you from above. This is why the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin. Now, that's easy to read and go, yeah, that's a good statement. Think about how chilling, I don't know what the word is, that may have been for Pilate. Because Jesus is just saying, I just told you I'm the Son of God. You have no authority at all unless I let you do this. I mean, that is in some way, that's Jesus throwing down the gauntlet and saying, the only way you're going to do anything for those people is if I allow it. I mean, that is a bold, bold statement standing in front of Pilate. But Jesus then says they have the greater sin than you do. In some ways, he's saying, you don't really know what's going on here. Which is, I mean, that there's so much there that is so tense. But then, from that moment, verse 12, John 19, from that moment, Pilate kept trying to release him. But here's the tipping point. We talked about this a little bit, I think. But the Jews shouted, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Anyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." This is the point where Pilate has to say, okay. I mean, this is coming from the Jewish leaders who are absolutely no friend of Caesar. But this is a reminder, and again, think of some of the historical context. He's been in hot water with Caesar. He's already had a problem with the Jewish leaders saying, we'll go straight to Caesar and complain about these images on the shields. You know, if you cause a problem with Caesar, it'll be your job. And if you don't do what we ask you to do with this guy who says he's a king, which means he's usurping you and Caesar, you're no friend of Caesar. So the Jews play politics. And it works. Okay, Matthew 27, verse 26. Verse 24. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that a riot was starting instead, he took some water and washed his hands in front of the crowd and said, "I'm innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Now, I don't know exactly the chronology of this, but it almost seems, Jesus just said, they're more guilty than you are. And now Pilate washes his hands in front of the people and says, this is on you now. You all do this. See to it yourselves. All the people answered, "His blood be on us and our children." That is a humongous statement. Then he released Barabbas to them, and after having Jesus flogged, handed him over to be crucified. So he has Jesus flogged, and he hands him over to be crucified. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time in this, just because it's probably more familiar to us at this point. We know about the mockery that Jesus dealt with. To the Romans, Jesus is just another Jew. As Jake mentioned, Herod put him in the robe of purple. It's interesting, if you dig into those words, it almost sounds like it's a dingy old cloth that they found. Because it isn't there's a word that is a gorgeous robe, which is described what the Jewish leaders wear. The word here is more like a faded out old cloth that they went, grab that and throw it on him. To just add to the mockery of all of it. To give him a rod, to give him a king's scepter. And then for Herod to send him back to Pilate like that, it would have been a joke. Pilate would have seen him walk in dressed as a king, and it would have been funny to him. Then as he walks along the way, as it's time for him to head from the palace to Golgotha, there's the crowd. You have to think the soldiers at this point are impatient. The soldiers have whipped Jesus. They've flogged Jesus. With the cat o' nine tails, there's all the details about how horrific that was. People die from that. And Jesus endures that and then moves out through the crowd. Matthew 27, verse 31. After they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe, put his own clothes back on him, and led him away to crucify him. So the shame in all of this, the fact that Jesus is probably wearing very little to walk through the crowd, maybe wearing his robe just to carry the cross, but he's being led through the streets. The normal way for a crucifixion to take place, the cross beam is what the prisoner, what the one to be crucified would carry. In this case, it seems like Jesus carried the whole cross. And that's when Simon the Cyrenian comes into play. They see Simon standing there and they say, "Help this guy." When it goes through the text as we proceed through this, and it says they brought him to Golgotha, the words there, the verbs there indicate they were literally dragging Jesus along. They brought him there because he couldn't make it on his own at this point. Because he's lost so much blood. He's in such a horrible condition. But look at Luke 23. Because this is one of those moments that to me is almost inconceivable. Luke 23, this is the crowd as Jesus goes through this crowd. He sees people who are emotional for him. Some people who are upset by this. A large crowd of people, verse 27 of Luke 23. A large crowd of people followed him, including women who were mourning and lamenting him. So there are people there. And I think it's interesting that it points out it's the women who were touched, who are lamenting this. That means they're torn up about this. This is not just, this is unfortunate. This is horrible. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. Look, the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the women without children, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' They will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" What's Jesus saying there? Yeah, he's saying that there's a time coming where it's going to get even worse. It's going to get far worse for you people. And he says, if your leaders are going to act this way when the Messiah is with them, imagine how they're going to be when I'm not. Imagine what it's going to be. In fact, it's going to be so bad. Rome's going to wipe. And literally, I don't know if you know this. When Rome destroyed the temple in AD 70, the Jewish records were lost. I mean, there's no anybody who claims to be a descendant of the Levitical priesthood now. There's no way they can prove it because they were all destroyed in AD 70 when Titus destroyed the temple. But one thing Jesus says here is really, really staggering that we miss culturally, I think. What did Sarai want more than anything? A child. How many times we see in Scripture pointed out somebody who can't have children? You think of Hannah. Just give me a child, and if you give me a child, I'll give him right back to you. Because childbearing was so important. I would say it's still important, obviously, but in their culture, your children, having children was what every woman, maybe that's too grand to say, but it's what every woman wanted. They want to have kids. And Jesus says, "Blessed are those women who never will have kids." That would be such a shocking statement to the Jewish mind. Because kids are your workforce, kids are your inheritance, kids are everything. And Jesus says, you know what? The way things are going to go, you'll be better off you never had kids.
Yeah, just the point of them handing down all the genealogy and everything based on that. The right of the firstborn, how the family is promulgated from that.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah, everything is based on your legacy, your progeny that you leave behind. And Jesus says in this text, "Blessed are those wombs who never bear children." That would be shocking to them.
God struck Michael, David's wife.
Yeah.
She was very close to his wife.
Yeah.
And also, then they turned cannibalism. So, in the destruction.
Yeah.
You eat your own children.
Yeah, that was a curse that God used to curse Michael, David's wife, with not being able to have kids anymore. It's that significant that for Jesus to say that, he's saying this is going from a great blessing to a curse because of what's coming for you people. And then, speaking of the curse, Deuteronomy 21, verse 22 and 23. If anyone is found guilty of an offense deserving the death penalty and is executed, and you hang his body on a tree, you are not to leave his corpse on the tree overnight, but are to bury him that day, for anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. Now, we know, I think, we understand the significance of the cross. I mean, to us, you've heard it preached and taught, the cross isn't just jewelry. Where is jewelry? Whatever, that's whatever. But the cross was so much more than that in Jesus' day. It was a place where the worst were killed. It is in God's law that anyone hung on a tree is cursed. This was the lowest form of punishment. And we haven't even talked about the pain that Jesus dealt with. We haven't talked about the humiliation of hanging on the cross, borderline naked, with crowds around insulting him. But what happens on the cross, and we're going to have to go through this, and this is fairly familiar. What happens on the cross is, to me, is beyond stunning, what Jesus does on the cross. The first thing he says, when we start to see these 7 statements of Jesus, let me back up. Why do we have these 7 statements? You ever thought about why those are recorded? These are some of the most human things Jesus does while he's on the cross. But it's also some of the most divine things Jesus does while he's on the earth, while he's hanging on the cross. Because the first thing we have recorded, and listen, I believe these statements are recorded for us. We know, John says there's a ton of stuff that Jesus did and said that isn't recorded. But we get these 7 statements from the cross because we need them. Because we need to know who Jesus is. And if you want to know somebody who somebody really is, get them at the worst moment, get them in a tough situation and see how they act. This is Jesus. Luke 23, 33 and 34. There's a plea for forgiveness. He says, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. What does he mean by that? Is ignorance an excuse?
I'm still hung up on what we read earlier about the chief priest and the elders. They're the ones that they had made it up in their mind. And I think this kind of ties to that.
Yeah.
What Jesus is saying here. These people, just like Saul was so convinced that he was doing God's work.
Yeah.
By chasing down Christians. And these guys, the chief priests and the elders, were so convinced that this is what needed to be done. Now, of course, we know that they've got political motivations and all that stuff too. But I think that they truly thought, this is a guy who's blaspheming.
Yeah.
We've got to get rid of him.
Yeah. That it seems there's probably some of that. The Jewish leaders knew they were breaking laws. They had to know that. So it wasn't ignorance. Maybe the soldiers, maybe the crowd Jesus is encompassing with this statement. What I think he's saying, this is just my opinion, nobody gets the magnitude of what they're doing here. Nobody understands how horrible this really is. You all, you understand what's happening. You know you're crucifying a criminal in your mind, but nobody gets how huge very few. And I think Jesus is saying, forgive those who just have no idea what's happening here. Isaiah 53 verse 12, in that whole suffering servant passage, says he makes intercession for the transgressors. I mean, immediately. While he's still on the cross, he makes intercession for the transgressors. Ignorance is never a pass. The Bible is clear about that, and we have to understand that. Jesus is not saying that you're forgiven if you don't know. Ignorance is not a pass. That's just reality. Jesus is talking about the depth here, in my opinion, the magnitude of what's happening. Then, Luke 23:41 through 33, the criminals hanging there with him. One of them is deriding Jesus. The other one seems to have, he's done with it. He says, do you not know? This guy's not guilty. We are. And he has this exchange with Jesus, and Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. This is something Jesus can do. But we also have to remember this is never promised to anyone else. What happens on the cross is not available for us. It's not available for humanity. And for Jesus to say, you in this moment are forgiven and you can be with me in paradise, because Jesus has given us the terms. And God doesn't work that way. God doesn't change terms. In that moment, he had the ability to do that. Because he's God. He could say, this is how it's going to work, because the terms that we live under weren't set yet. So Jesus makes a promise to this guy. And then this, I'm almost glad we don't have time to focus on this too much. You think of the apostles, John, probably Peter, who are at least close. There's obviously some people there who are lamenting Jesus. These women, it mentions the Marys and the other people who are there. It's hard. It's hard to watch this guy that you've known, some of these people known his whole life. John, Peter, these guys have been around him for so much the last 3 years. How hard is it for Mary? Mary, who was told in Luke chapter 2, when before he's born, that he will this will all pierce your heart. The woman who kept these things in her heart about what Jesus was doing. The woman who's always there. I mean, she's mom. And Jesus says, take care of my mom. This is your son now. While he's dying on the cross. And then he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's hard for us to think, I think, of Jesus being abandoned on the cross. But that's what we have to grasp in all of this. When Jesus says in the garden, take this cup from me, we talked about that. That cup is God's wrath on sin, and it's being poured out on Jesus. He is bearing the sins of all of humanity. So all of humanity can have the opportunity to stand before God with zero sin. It's unreal. He says, I thirst for water, showing his humanity. And they give him this sour vinegar stuff. Also insulting, supposed to be kind of theoretically a pain reliever thing, supposedly, I don't know. But very human. And then he says, it is finished. This is a great word, a great phrase to dig into if you're a word nerd. Because it's a word, teleos is the word. It's I think that's the right word. It's an accounting term. He says the books are balanced now. The price is paid, everything's even. He says there's nothing that has to be done for sin anymore. No more sacrifices, no more journeys to Jerusalem, none of that. It's finished. The debt's paid. All we have left to do is respond to it. I mean, that's the beauty, that's the horror, but the beauty of all of this. And then the last, he says, into my hands I commit your spirit. In Luke chapter 23, verse 46. Imagine, you think about Jerry Fulfer just passing. Like I said, to us, it's sad. We hate to see somebody lose a family member. But that millisecond after he passes is the greatest moment in his life. And Jesus knows it's about to happen. He's about to be done with the pain. He's about to be done with everything else. Yeah, he's going to come back. but he's about to be out of this situation. And it's horrible, but it's victory. Having wiped out the handwriting requirements that was against us, contrary to us, he has taken it all away, nailed it to the cross. All the old law, all that old stuff, for those people there, it's all gone. For us, the pathway to heaven has been opened. Peter, in 40 days, is going to explain, here 42 days, is going to explain how all this is going to work. And you and I are given everything we need because of what happened right there. But then nature reacts in all of this. And I wish we had time to dig into this. It goes dark. Matthew 27:45, darkness is always a sign of judgment. God says, turn out the lights. This is a sign of judgment on sin. I also feel like, I don't know, that's just my perception. It almost seems like God just goes, no more. It's going to go dark. Don't look at my son anymore. Then, Matthew 27:51. This is one of the coolest moments in the Bible to me. I don't know why. I just think this is so cool. It says the veil is torn. How's the veil torn? Top to bottom. Why? So there's no doubt. What? So there's no doubt God did this. Somebody could grab it at the bottom and get a knife and hack through it and tear it out. It comes from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, the other thing that we have to keep in mind about that tapestry is that's no regular tapestry fabric.
Oh yeah.
Fire hose material.
Yeah, the thing is literally probably 4 inches thick. It isn't like a piece of t-shirt material. It's a giant thick thing that just goes down the middle. Signifies so much. Signifies, number one, we don't need these guys anymore. They've lost their job. Because now everybody can go to God on their own because of what Jesus just did. And then it says the earth shakes. I was just reading an article yesterday that there's some geologists, archaeologists guys who pinpoint this day based on seismic activity, which is bizarre. It's very interesting, but I'm not going to go into that. But again, the earth moving and breaking, that's another judgment metaphor we see throughout the Old Testament. This is God saying, I'm here, I'm watching this, and it's over now. Judgment has been made. And then the dead are raised. There's other things, amazing things that happen. But then there's this guy. Imagine what he's seen. He's watched these Jewish leaders that he either doesn't know or doesn't care about or doesn't like just be complete jerks to this guy. He's seen the worst of humanity on display. But he's also seen a great deal of love, an incredible amount of tenderness from the guy hanging on the cross. And when all of this happens, this guy, a Roman centurion, says, surely this man was the Son of God. Surely this guy was who he says he was. Matthew 27:54. He sees so much cruelty, but he sees so much affection and so much tenderness. And then Jesus is taken down from the cross. He's pierced, legs not broken. Jesus' bones, as to fulfill prophecy, no bones ever broken. His flesh was pierced, blood and water. But he's taken down from the cross. And I always wonder here too, what does Satan think at this moment? Are we going to have another bell or not? Do we not have another bell? All right, we're staying here. No, I'm just saying. Imagine what Satan thinks. Imagine what the angels think at this moment. Satan thinks victory. The angels think, what just happened? But what we have to remember, Jesus is deceased physically, but he's not defeated. And we know this. Now listen, we know how this ends, right? I'm sorry we have to go so fast with this. We know how this ends. I hope through this quarter you've seen more about knowing Jesus than you have before. And there's a whole lot of this that is super touching and is super heart-wrenching. We need to know this. But the world needs to know this. And that's our job. That this can't be a story that we keep to ourselves. because it's the most important thing that ever happened. Okay, we're holding up the whole operation here. Thanks so much for your attention this quarter. Next quarter, we start into the Psalms with me and some other people.